So last month, one of my teammates found a video of a guy who built a farm where they grew cloth and then traded it in for scrap. I watched it and thought that this had the potential to be really broken. The guy in the video was still manually watering his plants, but I thought if I could automate the watering, I could scale it up and elevate it from simple farming to industrialized farming. I spent a couple of days researching and crunching numbers, and I just couldn't believe how ridiculous this seemed. After doing testing, I built the mega farm. It was capable of producing an insane amount of cloth, and even attracted the attention of some of the server admins on Rusty Monthly. This video covers everything that went into making the farm and the numbers behind it. And because of that, this video is pretty number heavy. But if you don't care about every single number, you can skip around using the timestamps provided. So how much can the mega farm produce? Each planter can hold 9 plants. Each floor can hold 16 planters, and there are 4 floors. A plant with genes of 4 Gs and 2 Ys, otherwise known as the perfect genes, can produce 56 cloth when ripe, and it takes an hour and 35 minutes to ripen. Each floor can produce 8,064 cloth. With 4 floors, that's 32,256 cloth, which is over a box of cloth. Including the time it takes to harvest and plant, that is about a box of cloth every hour and 45 minutes, or 105 minutes. Now let's say you do 5 harvests a day. That would take 8 hours and 45 minutes, or about 9 hours. In that time, you would get 161,280 cloth, or 5 boxes in a little less than 2 rows. You can then take that cloth and go turn it into bandit camp. 50 cloth can be traded in for 10 scrap. That is a ratio of 5 to 1, meaning any amount of cloth you have can be divided by 5 and you'll get the amount of scrap you can get. So 5 boxes of cloth turns into a box of scrap, or to be more specific, with 5 harvests producing 161,280 cloth, you would get 32 scrap every 9 hours. At numbers this big, it can be a bit hard to imagine how much scrap that is. For 25 scrap, you could get 250 metal frags. That is a ratio of 1 to 10, meaning you can multiply the amount of scrap you have by 10 to get the total number of metal frags you will get. So 1 box of scrap turns into 10 boxes of metal, which is an insane amount of metal. For 50 scrap, you can get a stack of stones, which is a ratio of 1 to 20. So for a box of scrap, you can get 20 boxes of stone. If you were to craft the 20 boxes of stones into walls, that would be 400 walls, or a box and 10 stacks of walls. Wood is a bit trickier, since buying wood directly is not the best rate. It is better to buy stone than trade it in for wood. You can trade in 150 stone for 500 wood. That ratio is 1 to 3.33 repeating. So if a box of scrap gives you 20 boxes of stone, you can trade that in for 66.6 boxes of wood. Now for high qual, you can get it from recycling solar panels at Outpost or sprinklers at Bandit. Sprinklers have a slightly better ratio for high qual, but with the risk of getting clapped the moment you walk out the casino. A single solar panel costs 75 scrap and gives you 13 high qual when you recycle it. The exact cost is 5.77 scrap per high qual, so for a box of scrap, it will turn into 5.2k high qual. Now remember that high qual stacks to 100, so 5.2k turns into 52 stacks, or a box in 3 rows and 4 stacks of high quality metal. Now that's a lot of metal. You can also get gunpowder from recycling F1 grenades at Bandit Camp at a rate of 1.875 gunpowder per scrap. One rocket uses 150 gunpowder, 10 explosives, and 2 pipes. Each explosive uses 50 gunpowder, 10 sulfur, 3 low-grade fuel, and 10 frags. To get sulfur, you can recycle 1 gunpowder for 1 sulfur. Excluding pipes and low-grade, it would cost 400 scrap per rocket. Including low-grade and pipes, it would cost 467 scrap per rocket. A box of scrap would turn into 64 rockets, or 3.5 rows and 1 rocket. But good luck trying to recycle all those grenades at Bandit. This seems kind of broken, right? Well, there is one limiting factor, and that is transportation. It takes quite a bit of time to transport that much cloth, trade it in, transport the scrap to outpost, and take everything back home, all without dying. It's doable, but at that point you're basically just Amazon. It's even harder right now because of minicopter and horse hoarding. It will be easier once cars get put into the game, but that won't happen until July or August. With my group on Rusty Moose Monthly, we were able to trade in about 3 boxes of scrap over the course of a week. The main limiting factor was trying to find a mini, then doing trade-ins without the mini getting stolen or us getting clapped. You could also do it with a Scrappy, but that attracts a lot more attention, and it requires someone to guard the Scrappy or fly it away while people do trade-ins. You would also need a base there with windows to watch the backs of people trading in. That base may also get raided. The best way I can think to counter that is to just build 2 metal bases with a helipad and a TC in a different spot. People may raid a metal base to get rid of you, but no one is going to raid 2 metal bases to get rid of you. This will also probably be nerfed, but keep in mind, even if cloth exchange rates are cut in half, this would still be worth it. And even if the exchange rate were cut into a quarter of what they are right now, it would probably still be worth it with large groups. The only way I can see them stopping this kind of gameplay is to completely gut or cut the cloth trade-in. Moving on from that, let's talk about genes. It is said that the best genes for a plant is 4 Gs and 2 Ys, as long as you are not in the snow. But my preferred gene is actually 2 Gs and 4 Ys. Here's why. Keep in mind that these numbers are based on where I might farm last wipe, which was on the coast, where temperature dipped down to 57% at night. With 4 Gs and 2 Ys, you get 56 cloth per harvest, which takes an hour and 35 minutes to grow, which is 35.3 cloth per hour. With 2 Gs and 4 Ys, you get 66 cloth per harvest, and takes 2 hours to grow, which is 33 cloth per hour. That is a loss of 6.5%. But that assumes 100% efficiency and doesn't take into account the time it takes to clone, which for a large-scale farm takes a significant amount of time. I timed myself cloning plants and found the average time for a 4x4 planter layout, and then scaled that out for a large-scale farm. The results including cloning cycles are 4 Gs and 2 Ys results in 31.25 cloth per hour, 2 Gs, 4 Ys results in 30.85 cloth per hour, which is still a loss of 1.28%. So why bother? Well, there's one very important factor here, and that is your sanity and risk strain. A plant with 2 Ys will give you 3 clones, but a plant with 4 Ys will give you 4 clones. That means cloning cycles will have to be done less, which is worth that 1.28% loss to me. As for exactly how to crossbreed plants, refer to this video. It covers all the information you need to know. One piece of information that I would like to add on to that is 2 different red genes don't influence each other, meaning you can have a W and an X and 2 Gs, and the 2 Gs will overpower the 2 red genes. If the 2 red genes were the same, like 2 Ws, then this wouldn't work. This one trick helped me out a lot with crossbreeding. Also, I am working on a program to help with crossbreeding. You'll be able to input genes and then pick which genes you would want to crossbreed. It would then show you what the possible genes you can get as a crossbreed. That way you don't have to be constantly doing Sudoku and shuffling between plant genes in the game. I would be releasing it probably within a week or two after this video is done. Before we move on to the numbers for water and electricity, I wanted to go over how to take care of plants. Each plant has values for water, soil, light, temperature, and overall. The overall is what determines the overall health of the plant, which affects how quickly it grows and how much cloth it produces. The overall stat is determined by the lowest stat across water, soil, light, and temperature. The lowest stat is ground at 67% since you don't use fertilizer. And the reason you don't use fertilizer is because it is too valuable to sell for scrap outright. Since ground is always at 67%, you don't have to worry about the fluctuations in temperature that much unless you live in the snow. For water, it will be at 100% if the water in the planter is between 3,000 milliliters and 8,000 milliliters. Outside of that range, the water quality drops. At 9,000 milliliters, the water only drops to 71%, meaning you don't have to worry too much about overwatering. Also, the way you clone is by pressing and holding E on a plant, then selecting clone from the menu, if you didn't already know. You can also only clone during certain stages in the plant's life cycle, which is covered later. The Mega Farm uses a lot of electricity and water. I will assume you already know how to use basic electricity. If you don't know how, there are plenty of guides available on YouTube. I recommend this one. Water is the exact same as electricity, except when you move water from a lower source to a higher source, it needs to be pumped with a fluid switch supplied with 1 power. If it doesn't have any power, you can still use it as a switch to turn off water, as long as water is moving downwards. You can get around having to use fluid switches by having your water sources or water processing above where you use them. To get water for the farms, I use a lot of water pumps, which also pump water upwards, so you don't have to use fluid switches. A plant with no W uses 5 milliliters per minute. A full planter uses 45 milliliters per minute. 4 planters uses 180 milliliters per minute. A single water pump can pump 150 milliliters per minute, but for salt water, you have to purify it first. The powered purifier uses 5 power and can convert as much water as you can throw at it, but keep in mind that it only outputs 12 milliliters per second, or 720 milliliters per minute. Also, half of the water is wasted when purifying. It basically cuts the water you get from pumps in half. 720 milliliters per minute from the powered purifier seems like it can be enough for an entire floor, but sprinklers use 2 milliliters per second or 120 milliliters per minute, meaning a single purifier can power 6 sprinklers at most. But keep in mind, you want to satisfy the water need for the plants, not the sprinklers. The ratio I found best is 3 water pumps to a combiner to a powered purifier, a purifier to 4 sprinklers, with 1 planter per sprinkler. Each pump and purifier will use 5 power each. You can get around having to use a fluid switch if you put the fluid combiner above the purifier and the purifiers above the farms. There are better ratios if you were to use fluid splitters, but fluid splitters don't work with trickle water because they won't evenly split the water. Also, you have to keep in mind that sprinklers aren't 100% efficient all the time. I have seen it range from 70% to 130% efficiency. To get consistent efficiency, it is best to evenly spread out the sprinklers and the large planter boxes. Using temporary twig walls can help with this. Also with this setup, it will have the effect of sprinklers turning off and on all the time. It's going to look dumb, but it works. There's also a bug where the sprinklers would look like they're always on, but they're actually off. You can check if this is happening if some of the purifiers are starting to fill up with water. The easiest way to deal with this bug is to turn off and then turn on all the purifiers. The easiest way to do this is to put a switch before you split the power from your pumps. That way you can easily cut and restore power. If you don't need to purify water and have access to a fresh source, you can half the number of pumps you need. So for 3 pumps, you can have 8 planter boxes instead of 4, or you could do 5 pumps for 16 planter boxes, which is more efficient, but I haven't tested to see if it would work with sprinkler efficiency. Also, one important note is that fluid switches don't have a max amount of water you can push through. So you could have 20 pumps combined into a single fluid switch, then use the pass-through on a sprinkler to daisy chain all the sprinklers you need. If there's a river a couple squares away, you can just build a pump station at the river, then build an aqueduct with a couple of 1x1s with a fluid switch inside. Another important factor for growing plants is lights. A single ceiling light is enough to light up one planter, but that's not the most efficient way. You could try to put ceiling lights in the middle of 4 planters, but that won't light up the 4 corners at the outer edges of the planters. Another way is to put a light in between 2 planters. This covers all the plants and reduces the number of lights you need by half. The best way is to use 4 lights to cover 9 planters, but that only saves 1 light every 9 planters. Now that all the basic information is out of the way, we can move on to the part of actually building the mega farm. The mega farm is split up into 3 parts: the 2 pump stations and the main building which holds all the planters. Before we get on to how to build the pump stations, I wanted to go over additional information I provided in the description. I have included the Fortify file for the mega farm, which you can use to help build the farm. The Fortify also contains some possible starter farms which have a quarter of the space of the mega farm, so just 1 floor equivalent. Having a starter farm is great for getting the scrap needed to help cover the cost of materials, which is covered in a later section. I also included the circuit recreated on Rustrition. If you don't know what Rustrition is, it is a website that allows you to build circuits for Rust. There's both the XML data so you can import it to Rustrition directly, and a 6K by 3K image of the circuit. The image is included since it's easier to use and because Rustrition doesn't handle the large circuit all that well. It's getting a whole whopping 2 FPS working on this darn thing. What you have been seeing is that picture of the circuit. It may seem very intimidating because of its size, but it just contains all the concepts we've already covered, just scaled up. Even if you don't know what all the inputs and outputs are, you should still be able to build it just by following the picture, because the rest of the process is just building a base around the circuit. The picture also has the correct numbers for branches, so you don't have to figure out how much power is needed unless I made a mistake. For the water, I ended up using 2 pump stations. Each one has 24 pumps, which is enough for 2 floors or 32 planters. You could fit all of them into one base, but there's a risk of it getting raided and everything getting stolen, since everything can be picked up with a hammer. There are 3 wind turbines powering each pump station. Each connect to a separate medium battery. You could use 2 large batteries instead, but you need a root combiner. Medium batteries also have the benefit of being able to be bought at Bandit, which is cheaper than crafting them directly. Most of the wiring comes from the pump stations, and most of it is just powering all the pumps and routing the water from the pumps. All the pumps get wired to the fluid combiners in the farm. This involves a lot of running back and forth between the 2 bases. You could put the fluid combiners in the pump station and then use the electricity for the lights to instead power the fluid switches, but that comes at a cost of 73 high qual per pump station, which includes the cost of the 3 splitters and a branch. You could do it, and there's enough electricity to support it, but I don't recommend it. A 2x3 hole is more than enough to hold the 24 pumps. You could do a 3x3 hole and combine the 2 pump stations into 1 pump station, but I don't recommend it since everything can be picked up with a hammer. It also is quite a bit harder to place all the pumps so they would fit in the 3x3 hole. I also recommend building separate rooms for each of the batteries and splitters to better protect them. The upkeep wouldn't be that much more since the pump station is so small anyways. If you want to put in lights, you can run them off the battery that is only powering 6 pumps instead of 9. That pretty much covers the pump stations. Just make sure all the pumps are getting power correctly before hooking them up to the fluid combiners. As for the farm, it has 5 floors and is a 4x5. The first 4 floors have a 4x4 section that holds the planters. The 5th floor holds all the powered purifiers, batteries, and fluid combiners. The 5th floor has separate rooms as a protection for raiding. The TC is on the 1st floor, but it can also be on the 4th or 5th floor. On the 4th floor, you would just switch it out with the boxes that are there to store the clones. On the 5th floor, there's an empty space here for a TC or for roof access if you want it. The purifiers are separated into groups of 4, which is enough to cover an entire floor. This is to help keep track of the water for each floor to make it less confusing. Each of the groups has its own splitter and branch to supply power to them. You could also access the water output on the purifiers by crouching and climbing on top of them. Each water purifier will go to 4 sprinklers by using the pass-through on the sprinklers to connect them all. There is also a switch here for the bug that I mentioned earlier. Just make sure to flip this every 1 to 2 hours. You could also hook this up to a timer that activates every 1 to 2 hours to temporarily cut off power and re-enable it. Also, since I haven't mentioned it before, I should explain why the watering system doesn't use a sprinkler timer to control the watering of the plants instead. The reason is that it's really hard to scale up a sprinkler timer to this scale. Not only would you need a bunch of fluid switches, you would also need a bunch of splitters to send the toggle signal to all the fluid switches. Something like that increases the cost by about 200 high qual. That's pretty much it for the electrical and water. The other important thing is to evenly space out the sprinklers and planters. For the planters, you just need to build some twig and then place them as far apart as possible, as shown here. For the sprinklers, you want to try and place them in the center of the ceiling. With stone, you want to try and align them like this. I use the 2 holes in the center board to try and help align them, highlighted here. Once you get that, you just need to place the lights in between the 2 planters. After you get the lights, sprinklers, and planters placed, you just need to hook them up. Remember that 1 purifier goes to 4 sprinklers. For the lights, just use the pass-through to daisy chain all the lights together. Once you do all that, the mega farm is complete. The entire build process took me 3 hours on my friend's private build server. Building on a normal server would take around 4 to 5 hours. Before you start planning, I recommend you let the water run for 2 to 4 hours so you can check to make sure there's no issue with the water. You may notice that some of the planters are getting watered unevenly, but that should be fine. The planters near the center get more water than the others because of the range of the sprinklers overlaps. This is also one of the factors that contributes to sprinkler efficiency. This is also why you need to evenly space out the planters and sprinklers in the first place. As for the cost of everything, the next 2 sections will cover that. First, let's go over the build and upkeep costs. These numbers exclude the cost of doors, since you can put whatever doors you want depending on how likely you are to get raided, and they don't influence the overall upkeep that much. The farm part costs about 10k wood for twig, 58k stone for upgrade, and 12.5k stone for upkeep. Each pump station costs about 3k wood for twig, 18k stone for upgrade, and 2.8k stone for upkeep. The total cost is about 16k wood for twig, 94k stone for upgrade, and 18k stone for upkeep. If you convert these costs into scrap, the 16k wood for twig turns into 239 scrap. The 94k stone for upgrade turns into 4.7k scrap, and the 18k stone for upkeep turns into 900 scrap. Or another way to look at it is that it's 4.8k scrap to build it and 900 scrap per day for upkeep. Now moving on to the cost of components. The entire system uses 10 wind turbines, 2 large batteries, 6 medium batteries, 2 root combiners, 9 electrical branches, 1 switch, 25 splitters, 50 ceiling lights, 48 pumps, 16 powered purifiers, 16 fluid combiners, 64 sprinklers, and 64 large planters. Of these components, the ones you can buy for scrap are the wind turbine for 500, the medium batteries for 75, the ceiling lights for 30, the water pumps for 200, the fluid combiners for 30, the sprinklers for 15, and the large planters for 30. Of these components you can buy, the ceiling lights and the water pumps should not be crafted. The wind turbines and large planters can either be bought or crafted depending if you have the components or not. The 2 large batteries and 2 root combiners can be swapped out with 4 medium batteries instead, which is 18 high qual cheaper and has the convenience of being able to buy the batteries instead of crafting them. This would also require a slight change in watering at the purifier splitter, which is where the other 8 high qual comes from in the 18 high qual saved. I prefer large batteries for simpler wiring since you usually end up with a few large batteries from barrels, scuba diving, and raiding anyways. Assuming we craft the ceiling lights and water pumps and buy the rest, and craft the 2 large batteries, the total cost would be 8,810 scrap, 472 high qual, 12,340 metal, 24,000 wood, and 320 cloth. If you convert all the costs to scrap, the 472 high qual turns into 2,724 scrap, the 12,340 metal turns into 1,234 scrap, the 24,000 wood turns into 358 scrap. If you add all those costs for the components together, you get 13.1k scrap and 320 cloth. As for the total cost of everything, the build cost in scrap is about 4.8k scrap and 900 scrap for upkeep. If we assume that the farm will be up for 2 weeks, the upkeep for those 2 weeks will be 12.6k scrap, making the total build cost 17.4k scrap for 2 weeks. The cost of components is 13.1k scrap and 320 cloth. If you combine both the cost to build it and the cost of the components, it is 30.5k and 320 cloth. With the farm being able to produce 32 scrap every 5 harvests, which takes 9 hours, that means the farm pays for itself in 5 harvests, with 1.5k scrap left over. That pretty much covers the entirety of the mega farm, but there's still a couple of other bits of information I wanted to include, such as the cost in metal versus stone. You want to consider if you want to build the base out of metal or stone. Normally spending that much metal on a base this big that's only a secondary base would seem outrageous. With the amount of scrap that this thing can produce, it's not as crazy, especially since you're going to want to be supplying the upkeep with scrap that is produced from this farm. Going back to where we went over the conversion rates for scrap into materials, a box of scrap turns into 10 boxes of metal, or 20 boxes of stone, which means that metal is twice as expensive as stone in terms of scrap. For the farm portion, the upkeep is 12,500 in terms of stone. If you were to upgrade the farm to metal, the upkeep will then be 8,335. Since metal is twice as expensive as stone, the metal cost converted to stone in terms of scrap is 16,670. That is a 28.6 increase in cost. While metal is more expensive, metal has the added benefit that it is easier to transport and that you can fit more metal in a TC. That way you don't have to refill the TC with stone every day. I also want to add some quick notes on the operation of the farm, and also include some information about plants that wasn't included previously. Each floor in the mega farm uses 3 stacks of clones to plant, meaning it takes a whole 2 rows of clones to plant the whole farm. Because it takes so much longer for plants to grow completely than to grow to a stage where they are clonable, it is better to do cycles where you clone and cycles where you harvest, as opposed to planting the whole thing and then just taking clones from a small portion of it, wasting the fully grown cloth. With 2 Ys, you will get 3 clones when cloning, so it is best to do a clone cycle and then 2 harvest cycles to ensure you never run out of clones. With 4 Ys, you get 4 clones when cloning, so you need to do a clone cycle and then 3 harvest cycles. The life cycle of a plant is seed to seedling to sapling to crossbreed to mature to fruiting to ripe to dying. For hemp, you can start cloning at the sapling stage, but for whatever reason you cannot clone at the crossbreeding stage. The plant will stay in the ripe stage for about 1.5 to 2 hours, so you don't have to be too worried about missing a harvest cycle. You want to also make sure that you harvest the plants in the ripe stage. That is when the plant is fully grown. It does not matter how long it has been in the ripe stage, only that it is in the ripe stage. I would once again like to remind you about the bug with the water. Make sure to flip that switch every 1 to 2 hours. You can tell if the bug is happening if the plants are not at or near max capacity for water. The water the system provides should be more than enough for the plants. That pretty much covers everything. Just kidding, I have an update. After the video was almost done, I figured out a more efficient ratio. The new ratio is 4 pumps to 2 fluid combiners, the fluid combiners to a purifier, and a purifier to 6 sprinklers. The new ratio uses more fluid combiners, but the cost is negated from the cost of purifiers, powering, and wiring. The reduction of power could let you outright remove a wind turbine or replace it with the solar panel. Because the ratio doesn't fit well with 64 planners, I decided to just shoehorn it in rather than come up with a new farm layout. The farm layout would use 11 purifiers instead of 16. The 10 purifiers get 4 pumps and one still gets 3 pumps. That way 10 purifiers go to 6 sprinklers and one still goes to 4 sprinklers. On the farm side, it would save 11 high qual and 29 power from the 5 purifiers, 1 splitter, and 3 branches. Across both pump stations, you can remove 5 pumps, which saves 26 power and about 13 high qual from wiring. I didn't realize this before because I just assumed the addition of fluid combiners wouldn't be worth it and didn't consider the cost and savings in wiring and power. I also didn't realize that it would end up reducing the number of pumps needed. I'll be working on an updated circuit that would be done in a few days. That pretty much covers everything to do with the mega farm. I'm glad if you stuck through the video the whole way. I know this was kind of long, but I didn't quite expect it to be this lengthy when I first started out making it. I wanted to include all the numbers that went into making this mega farm happen, mostly because I knew if I didn't, people would question why I made these weird decisions for the farm. Heck, even my teammates were questioning this when I was explaining it to them, but they trust me enough to go ahead and give me the materials needed to build this monster. I wanted to get this video out several weeks ago, but between finals and me injuring my right leg making me unable to sit from doing dangerous activities such as exercising while fat, I was unable to work on this video for quite a long time. Also, as I said before, once this video is done, I'm going to be working on that software that helps with crossbreeding, so make sure to look out for an update for that. If you have some questions that I didn't answer in the video, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll try to get to them eventually, or maybe never. I'm not the most sociable person. I don't really know how to end the video, so here's a picture of that time I jammed 5 ribs into a boat base.